light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. I try to be upbeat in all my shows. I try to empower people. I've often said, and I really fully believe it, that the reason I exist as Sister Who, the reason this unconventional ministry exists, is specifically to nurture the personal and spiritual growth of others. All that being said, and I'm not fond of lapsing into pop psychology that says, look on the bright side and all that sort of stuff. So I prefer to be honest about things, because when I honestly identify it, then I know what I'm dealing with, and I can begin to devise ways of responding to it and addressing it and being proactive about it, rather than saying, well, there's nothing we can do. And I've lost count of the number of times I've heard people say that to me. Well, there's nothing we can do, or there's nothing you can do. And more often it means that there's nothing that they want me to do, or rather that they want me to do nothing so that it won't challenge the unjust situation that they are in the process of creating for me. The emotional wrestling match that I still find myself in from time to time, though, is when something is going seriously wrong and no one will do anything. And I don't want to leap to snap judgments, well, then you must really not be my friend, or you really don't love me then if you won't. Well, that's kind of an overstatement, and it may not be entirely accurate. And most situations are so complex that it's not wise to jump to those kinds of summary conclusions, shall we say. When I lost my house in northwest Denver, there were a lot of people who said they cared about me who would do absolutely nothing. When I lost a fixer-upper house that I managed to acquire in northern New Hampshire, a house that had been sitting empty for over a year, and I figured nobody really cared about it, right? Well, except that they were very concerned about being able to control everything. It wasn't about what I did or what I didn't do. It was about someone being able to control my life. And I've never been a person who anyone can control. I don't really mean to be rebellious. I just find that in acting according to my own integrity and in acting in ways that my autism allows, what I wind up doing is, I have to do things my own way, because the way everybody else does them doesn't work for me. In the same way that a blind person can't go to a public library and use the resources in the same way, there's a lot of challenges about life that my brain processes differently, and I have to do them in a different way. And if we get the job done, it would seem to me that that should be what's most important. But sometimes other people's issues and agendas and egos get in the way. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to them. I can't get the job done the way they want me to get it done. But I do need to get the job done, and so I accomplished way more than anybody thought I would. But without their permission, it just wasn't tolerable, and so that was another house that I lost. I need a place to call home, though. When I don't know where home is, it is very disorienting. When I had a home for 15 years, an amazing amount of work of this ministry got done, and so many wonderful things happened during that time. But for the not entirely, a lot of them stopped when I lost the house, but not all of them, because I was able to keep some things going, but not everything I wanted to. But not having that orientation of knowing where home is makes such a big difference in my emotional and mental strength to deal with challenges. But because of the people who contact me and say, this has helped me so much, I feel a duty to keep going to my last breath. If hopefully it doesn't come to that. But then again, there was one astrologer in the early 1990s who predicted that I would die a martyr's death, and I just kind of said, well, I guess we'll find out. I'm certainly the sort of person who would do it, because if somebody were to point a gun at me and say, recant or I'll shoot you, then I would say pull the trigger, because I stand by my integrity, and if it's going to cost me my life, then it will cost me my life. But my life has to go wherever my beliefs go. And so in that sense, I guess I'm the sort of person who could easily wind up a martyr if I were ever put in that situation, because I wouldn't hesitate to risk my life for my dogs, or to say, though, this is wrong, and running away from it is wrong, and doing nothing is wrong. I have to do something. I can't just ignore it. But that's what puzzled me so much about all the people I've known over the last 15 years, who on one hand would say they loved and cared about me, and then on the other hand, when my life was very specifically threatened in a holistic sort of way, would do absolutely nothing to prevent the disaster. It seems to me if we put our heads together, we could have come up with something, but everyone seemed to shrink back as if they were afraid of my misfortunes rubbing off on them somehow. And a number of times I just looked at them point blank and said, if this were happening to you, you would be outraged. Why is it okay that it's happening to me? And they had no answer. And I don't know if I expected an answer or not, but I just wanted them to think that it's not about, when it comes to injustice or evil of any sort being done, it's not about the identity of the perpetrator or the victim. It's about the nature of the action. If it's racist, it doesn't matter if it's the Hutu and the Tutsi, or the Inuit and the Eskimo, or the French and the Germans, or the Japanese and the Chinese, or blacks and whites. It doesn't matter who's on which side. The nature of the action is what makes it an injustice. The nature of the action is what identifies it as being based in categorical racism, rather than being an appropriate response to the individual who's standing in front of you. If you're devaluing and dismissing and marginalizing them simply because of some superficial characteristic that has nothing to do with the issue or the dynamic at hand. I mean, if what you need is a doctor, does it really matter what race the doctor is, as long as the doctor is there when you need the doctor? And yet there are some people who will quibble over that, and who would rather die than receive care from someone of the wrong color of skin, or receive care from a person of the wrong religion. There's in a city where I used to live, there was a Seventh-day Adventist hospital. Does it matter what then there was a Catholic hospital, then there was the secular hospital. Does it really matter which one you go to when you're bleeding to death? The point is to find someone who is able to do the action of saving your life and of stopping the bleeding. But if you're concerned about the religion of the person, which has nothing to do with the ability to stop a bleeding wound, then you may go to a hospital that's too far away and bleed to death on the way. It just, things like this don't make any sense. But to me it still comes back to remembering the people who did nothing when I was in need, even though I had helped them in their hour of need. And because I want to show them what kind of person I am, and remind myself this is not about scorekeeping, and this is not about playing an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. As Gandhi wisely said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth leaves the whole world blind. And the whole world blind is not what Sister Who is trying to make happen. So they didn't help me. I went through it. I suffered enormous loss. And somehow, in spite of that, in spite of everything against me, I did manage to keep my family together. All of my I have 3 registered support dogs, 2 emotional support animals, and 1 service dog. They've all been validated by my psychologist. We are a 4-person team. It's just that 3 people on the team happen to be canine. But we function as a 4-person team, and it's a very tightly knit unit. And I managed to keep all of us together throughout all of the insanity of the last few years of my life and all the injustices that we've experienced. That counts for something, because that's where love resides, in the relationships between the 4 of us. That's the love that keeps us together, and the love that keeps me able to do these shows and write my newsletters each month and so forth. Without that love in my life, I'm quite certain I wouldn't have made it this far. But I still don't know exactly what to do about all the people along the way who did nothing. Some of whom absolutely did have the resources to erase the problem in a moment, but chose not to. And part of me looks at that and says, okay, so maybe they're, I don't want to sound like a snob or like I'm putting myself on a pedestal. Maybe they're just less mature spiritually and emotionally than I am. Maybe they haven't learned the life lessons that I've learned. Maybe there's things they don't understand that I do, and maybe someday they will understand, and so I need to give them time to grow. To which I can say that's all well and good, and I will try to do that. But it's very, very difficult when you're standing nose to nose with a problem and they have the solution in their hand, but they're choosing not to share it. And respecting their choice, because I do believe in freedom of choice. If it wasn't for freedom of choice, I wouldn't be able to be Sister Who, because if there was no freedom of choice, I'm not sure this would be tolerated. So I believe in freedom of choice, and I respect others' choices, which I was telling someone about my parents at one point, and it was a woman who was a mother who was straight. She was about the same age as my parents, and I asked her, well, my parents choose not to have an openly gay person in their lives. Shouldn't their choice be as respected as everyone else's? And she was the one who said, no, not when it's the wrong one. And I said, well, I don't quite know how to, so what does that mean? What do I do? Do I go scold them? All the different things have been tried already. None of them have worked. So the only thing left to me, either it came down to a choice of either I could tie myself to the situation and be victimized it because of their refusal to embrace unconditional love for their son, or I could get on with my own life and just say, this isn't working, and I'm sorry you don't want me. The only thing I've got left to offer you is to respect your choice to exclude me. And in a similar sort of way, that happened with the house that I bought in northern New Hampshire, that I was told this was a state where there would be liberty and freedom, and the state motto is live free or die, and you can't support any of that based on my experience of that state. I went there to live free and be a burden to no one, and take what nobody wanted and fix it up and make it work and make it safe and bring it gradually completely up to all the standards, but it would take a bit longer than the usual process, and I'd have to do it in different ways, but I really would bring everything up to exactly what you want. And that wasn't good enough. And in the end, I think they were the losers, though, because they chose to exclude me and marginalize me and arbitrarily declare my house unsafe for habitation, even though they didn't have any way of supporting a single one of their false accusations about dangers in the house. Because there were no dangers. I eliminated every single one of them. And I knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew how to do it right, and I reinforced everything that needed reinforcing, and I put breaker switches where breaker switches needed to be, and everything was so much safer than it had been, and it was done correctly, it was done right, it was done well, it was done in a slightly different way and a different configuration, but they said, get out, we don't want you, you can't live here. And in the bigger picture, they were the losers, because I was building my house into an artist studio on the top floor, and the rest of it would have become communal space for everyone in the community to use, where anyone could have come and recorded videos and had nonprofit organization meetings and yoga classes. I mean, I was creating a community resource, none of which is available to that community now, which the community is still dying because it's losing its industry, it's losing its people, it's losing everything, it's losing its population. But the point I'm trying to make is that it was a situation that was hell-bent on venting injustices on me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. But somehow, going through the midst of it, I still had to find a way to maintain my mental and emotional health. And in a similar sort of way, there are people who, thankfully, not all of us, not everyone, but the statistics are horrid in terms of how many people across the country find themselves in situations of being the victims of injustice and rape and murder and assault and all sorts of horrible, horrible things. And you, at a certain point, I think one realizes that there's no way to stop this from happening, and you're going to be conscious through all of it, and you're going to have this memory to deal with and to process for the rest of your life, however long that may be, or however short that may be. And there are people who have lived through horrendous situations, and they're still here. And I have to wonder, how do you maintain your sanity? That would be such a horrid, horrid memory to have buried in your head, and how many years of psychological counseling to process the grief and the loss and the betrayal of trust and the people who said they loved you but wouldn't do anything when your life was at stake. And do you still call them friends? What do you say to them when you see them on the street? Or do you avoid them at all costs because you can't look at them anymore because of what they didn't do when you were in need? How do you, I guess what it comes down to in actual practice, when you have to do it and your life depends upon it and life continues afterwards, how do you do forgiveness? And what does forgiveness really mean? Logically, it should mean not putting yourself in harm's way again. Because I don't want to be telling the spouse living with domestic violence, living with physical or psychological or emotional abuse that drives them to the edge of suicide. I don't want to tell them you need to stay there and forgive them and work through it. Yeah, right. When it gets to certain extremes, you need to get out. And you need to find a secure place from which to operate in order to address the conflicts and address the problems. And forgiveness, yes, but forgiveness doesn't mean putting your head on the chopping block and waiting for someone to drop the axe. And so there were situations, as with the house in New Hampshire, where it got to where I could see the axe coming down toward my neck on the chopping block, and I knew that it was time to get my head off the chopping block and get out of there. And I left with basically 2 days to spare, because 2 days later is when the notice appeared on the front door and my house became totally unlawful to live in by their decree, but not because they had actually been able to prove there was anything wrong with it. It was simply an abuse of power. And that's what is going on in all of these situations, in rape, in murder, in domestic violence. It is always an abuse of power. And if there is no one who cares enough to say, this abuse of power will stop and you will not be allowed to do this. I mean, in the most simplistic sense, it goes all the way back to elementary school for me when I was on the playground, being beaten up by bullies on the playground, and the playground monitor refusing to intervene. And when these reports coming to the adults and the principal and the teachers and the parents being willing to do absolutely nothing to stop the abuse from continuing. And it's kind of followed me through life. And I guess the amazing thing is that I've survived all of it. That every time one of these things happened, it didn't kill me. It just made me more stubborn and more resilient and more aware of watching all the details in my environment, so that I knew 2 days before that town was going to seize control of my house in New Hampshire that now was the time to leave. Kind of like in the movie Sound of Music with Captain Von Trapp, recognizing we must get out of this house tonight. We must get out of Austria tonight. And, playing it, not playing with it, but watching and waiting and trying to figure out what the options were all the way down to the last minute, and then recognizing that the last minute had come. And in that last minute, knowing it's time to leave. Even if I'm just walking down the side of the road, even if I'm hiding at the woods at night, even if I'm even if I have to hike 200 miles to a relative's house in another state, whatever it is, there's a time where the drastic solutions become the only solutions. And it still boggles my mind, the people who stood by and did nothing while all this unfolded. And I want to get to a place where I can forgive them and move on with my life. But I know that I'm going to have to find ways to deal with the emotional and psychological healing, the betrayal of trust, all those sorts of things. Do I want to write them off as being bad people? No, maybe not bad people, but perhaps a little bit more cowardly than it would have been helpful for them to be. And if they are cowardly people who have not learned how to develop courage, who have not learned how to stand up and say, no, I will not do this. If they have not learned that strength, if they have not developed that strength, if they haven't been willing to do the exercises to build the muscles. It's like when I was in those 5 bodybuilding competitions. It wasn't about the 90 seconds I spent on stage. It was about the exercises I did every single day for a year and a half leading up to that time. I didn't want to get to that moment and find that I wasn't prepared. So I had to do the exercises on a daily basis. If I wanted the muscles, I had to lift the weights. If I wanted to be able to deal with these kinds of challenges, I had to be willing to push against all the weight that anybody ever dumped on me. I had to be willing to embrace the heaviness of emotion, the heaviness of loss, the heaviness of betrayal, and still find a way to be the loving, honest, decent person that I believe myself to be. That part I could not surrender, or I would lose so much that nothing would be worth saving anymore. As long as I could save the face of my soul that I saw in the mirror, that I am committed to being an honest, hardworking, loving, generous, kind, compassionate person, that no loss or betrayal of trust would ever be worth enough to take that from me, to surrender my soul to the pain that any of those experiences included. But to always find the self, even if it's through sheer stubbornness, the self that was larger than the pain I had to endure. The self that under no circumstances would ever yield. That would say, if you're going to kill me, then kill me. But do not think for 1 minute I will ever give in and be some other person that you want me to be. I will be myself to the very last, and that is the only person I will ever be. Obviously, I have very passionate feelings about all this yet, because there's a lot of deep emotional wounds that haven't healed yet. And consequently, there's a lot of people I met over the years that I'm not visiting or calling or trying to reconnect with at this point. There are some that I have connected with, and I find them to be people who genuinely care. And I hope that as they and I work together and preserve our love for each other, that we will find ways to adjust all the logistics of life, the housing questions and the poverty questions and the health questions and all the other challenges. And whether we succeed or whether we fail, the point is we'll be holding hands through all of it, and in spirit and in soul we will be together through all of it. And come hell or high water, I'm not giving up. And I hope and pray that you will be able to find a similar strength for whatever challenges, whatever injustices, whatever horrendous experiences you have to face, and that in the midst of it all, who you are will remain intact, will remain strong, will remain absolutely real and absolutely present, because this world desperately needs people with that kind of strength in their souls. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be.